All right, this is the interview with Mr. Bellman. So, how do you create a positive classroom climate?
I learned from one of my colleagues that greeting students and establishing something of a personal rapport and being consistent with that, if not constant. And I have found an old truism to be quite helpful in that a smile goes a long way. And so I try to make students feel that when they come into the classroom, um, this is where you belong. This is a good place to be. We're gonna have some energy in here, and I try to actually make it look like without going overboard too much that you're actually going to have fun learning. We're going to actually talk about some things, and it's going to make your brain, kind of work, and that's going to be okay. And so when they come in here and recognize that it's all right, and I still have to work kind of throughout a semester to try to alleviate issues with students who have concerns throughout it, but to try to establish that this is a welcome place to learn. We value the learning. You didn't waste your time getting up this morning to come here. We're going to do some things, and that I have a more than just general regard for who you are as a person. You aren't just student number 27. You are so and so.
Yeah.
So doing that doesn't solve everything there, but it at least sets a tone. And if you can try to be consistent throughout the year with that tone, um, they know coming into the class what to expect, and that often helps overall environment for
How long did it take you to feel comfortable, like creating that climate in your classroom?
learning. Well, I've always kind of just in my personal character been a rather outgoing, typically smiling or laughing myself, so it kind of fits within my character to be like that. So that's always kind of been me. But actually, in terms of using that more deliberately to craft a classroom, I would say that took me probably, I'll say 5, 7 years to kind of figure out how to do that maybe systematically, make that a part of who I am professionally, not just personally. And then find ways too, and I continue to find ways to set a tone for the classroom. And these are old habits going back to a name that should be familiar still in education, Madeline Hunter, that when the kids come into the classroom, there should be a task that sets them already with a frame of mind of accomplishment, of doing something, of getting right into the flow. And so making that happen more regular, that's actually been an ongoing thing. And I'm still getting better at that. But trying to actually reach out to them personally and make them feel like it's okay to be in the class and we're going to be good, that took a little bit. I would say one of the things that helped me when I got here to the high school, and by the time I got to the high school, I had taught several years at a middle school and I had taught at a college level. Um, I was coaching and trying to create personal relationships with the players helped when making personal relationships with the students. So the coaching element actually was a boost to me.
Cool. What aspects? Oh, sorry. How do you meet the needs of all of your learners?
That's a tough one. It's a tough one. In a general class like this, where you have a spectrum of talents reaching from the very highest levels of a particular class to some of the you hate to use the word lower, but the skill bases aren't up to grade level as strongly. That's probably a professional polite way to say it. It becomes difficult because you have to balance out then some of the basic foundational elements that some of your students are still grasping to put together without dragging your top end performers down a path that they have well worn out and to lose their interest. And kind of like, yeah, kind of like, again, sports analogies. Then if you begin to turn off your top players from engaging and performing at their best, it kind of has a ripple effect throughout the dugout. So to try to do that, then a couple of things. One, I tried to approach a variety of styles of presenting an information, from just straight giving you some information on the board to the use of video material, to the use of group work with them, to the use of readings, short readings where they engage and we work on analysis. So I'm trying to provide some fairly high level stuff that the high level performing students can polish, but also reinforcing. And one of the words that one of my colleagues used some time ago was the term layering.
Mhm.
And so trying to present and consistent with avid knowledge about learning steps, trying to present something repeatedly in sometimes similar ways, overlapping ways, and different ways, but all to converge. I think you have to kind of play with something for about 7 times, if you will, before it really kind of gets traction in your mind. So in the class, and this kind of, some of my top end learners might get a little bit fatigued with this, but I will repeat material. So I try to draw on both the book sources, note sources, and try to use some overlap so that that syncs more. But at the same time, try to give to the top learners some nuanced connection that maybe they missed the first time around. So that I'm trying to pique the interest of both the high and still reinforce some foundational with those are kind of behind the curve in terms of grade level. Um, it's not easy, and I would say that if I stray off my course, I stray off my course toward the high end performers, what we call the students who do school well. That's probably not the best place to be, but it kind of happens. It kind of
Very
happens.
interesting. What aspects of diversity do you have in your class?
Aside from the learning capacities and the grade level performance of the students, we have students obviously with some language issues. And so every year I have somebody who comes from a home background where another language was dominant and English constructs are still something they're acquiring. And at various levels too. I had an incident. Thankfully, the young lady was only in my class for 3 days. I mean, she was like 2 weeks in the United States from an African country with very few English words to her base. And that was unfortunate, but just the way scheduling was, finally they kind of worked it out. So I've had that range there, briefly. Um, but I've had smattering with the language issues, and then sometimes there are cultural issues that you begin to pick up. We begin to get students from different countries, but also different regional cultures, ethnic cultures within our own country. And we overlay this with even economic issues, so that we'll have some students that are coming from um, homes in which the struggle to get by on a day-to-day basis is kind of the focus, and then we have students coming from some pretty high levels of affluence, and that has a bearing on how they view their place in school and their performance. So trying to kind of recognize that without pigeonholing the student into a particular stereotype, that becomes an ongoing balancing act. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It goes back to something we said earlier when we were talking about how to have an eye on who your students are, as well as the subject you're trying to teach
How has that diversity in your classroom changed the way that you've taught certain students or the class as a whole?
layering again,
Hmm.
going back, and particularly for those with language skills, hearing words over again, and I have found myself consistently now putting terms on the board and then giving explanation to them, particularly terms that I thought were critical or key to the focus of that day's learning and the overall unit that we're in. And I have used within the board ways templates for them to kind of see information a different way, and graphic organizers that might get them to process that information in a way that kind of suits them, but also to draw on references from a variety of different cultures to show something of a kind of underlying connectivity between us as humans. But I've had some students then that were from other areas of the world, and when I began talking to them and talking to the class about that particular world, you could I could see them sit up a little bit more. I could see that their shoulders straightened back for more because I was talking about something that normally other American teachers don't talk about, either for lack of information or just doesn't fit with what they're doing. And so I've had a number of students from outside of the United States and Europe, a kind of a Western-based culture. And because world history, lends itself, if you will, I try to draw on stories from a lot of different cultures. We have had, and so to mark a change, we have had an increase since the time I've been here at Park Hill, and this is, I think, across the board, a rise in the number of students that are coming from North African and East African areas, particularly places like Ethiopia and Sudan. So to talk to them about the great Ethiopian kingdoms, to talk to them about Darfur and some of the current issues of Sudan, to talk about the trek that refugees make through the Sahara Desert to get to Europe, to get to the United States, to talk about the great kingdoms of West Africa, and to put that in a broader context of accomplishment of people, I have found that reach out. Now, I can't craft all of my lessons around that, but by trying to make a nod beyond just the kind of Western centric position, which is important. Important, can't lose that either. Touching on base with that has been helpful to reach that ethnic base. The struggle I've had is how to bridge some of the challenges that kids who come to us with a mentality that school is just a hurdle. You just got to put your 4 years in, and then I'm going to go out and I'm going to do X. So this is irrelevant. That has been a much more difficult challenge to try to broach that. That's been hard. World history doesn't necessarily lend itself if you are already in mind that you're going to get a more pragmatic, kind of hands-on kind of career. That's a hard sell.
Yeah, that's interesting. What are two different ways that you integrate technology into your classroom?
Use of video material, use of PowerPoints. I'm not terribly good with the smart board, even though I have one in here, and I really need to be better about it because there are ways that you could manipulate it to get a more seamless presentation of things in that regard. Um, I try to point out to them with the online text how to manipulate and use this and bridge that gap between how to use the old-fashioned kind of handheld textbook and how to translate some of those skills to an online, and trying to use that to manipulate it easier for information gathering, how to kind of manipulate through that, which is something I never really took the time to do. Of course, that's been brought on by the onset of the use of online textbooks. So I find myself having to kind of reinforce some of those procedural elements. But I would say that I've still rather limited in turning them over to creating. Um, so, for example, video presentations themselves, to work with technology on their own on a particular project-based kind of task. So that's still kind of outside my realm. I still stay rather, history is about reading primary documents, so let's kind of stay with that. So yeah, there's been a little bit of limit. Yeah. That said, for those of you who are listening, there's a fly that seems to be buzzing around my head like I was a watermelon that's decomposing. So and it's bothersome. But that I would say that I would still lag to some degree in a much more immersed technological aspect.
And my last question is, what advice would you give me as a first year teacher and as a student about to go to college?
Well, we've had conversations before, and I would say one of the focuses that I've learned over the course of time, as we kind of talked about, as a first year teacher, um, be mindful of the bureaucratic nature of the job, that there is going to be paperwork, there are going to be meetings, there are going to be elements that seem rather professionally stuffy that you just have to kind of muddle through in some respects. And so, stay on that, on top of that to the best of your abilities, but don't try to let it weigh you down too much either. Maintain your passion for the subject that you have and try to find ways, again, without going over the top, of actually infecting your students with a passion for learning. And never lose that as kind of a core element. And allow yourself to take some risks in teaching too, to try some things out, even if it looks like it fails abysmally. Um, don't be afraid to kind of look at and try something in terms of the way you present some information. I think it's only by doing that that you begin to land on things that really work well and things that don't. And I think you'll come to find out that some of those things that you want to try work really well with one group of students, but don't work particularly well with another. But you have to you have to immerse yourself and give yourself a chance to do that. Third, I think, again, it goes back to the interpersonal relationships, not just with your students, but most importantly, too, in this regard, your colleagues. Smile, enjoy, be the dude that people, like, oh man, I'm glad he stopped by. Don't be the dude that's like, he couldn't have left soon. And that doesn't mean that you have to go around and be everybody's friend, but certainly get to know the people who are on your staff. Find people within your department and outside your department who you could find as a mentor, who you could pick pieces from and utilize. And it never hurts. It's an old truism again, never hurts to know the support staff. Do not treat them dismissively. They are an integral part of how the school runs. And so never try to pull quote unquote rank with people. Just know that you are a cog as well, and you're a part of that. And it's taking everybody, both the teaching staff and the non-teaching staff, to kind of row in the same direction to make a school work. And so those are some really important things just first year and last year to keep in mind. If you go off to college, know that you are going to be put in a situation, most students going off to college are put in a situation where they now have to craft a pattern of behavior for themselves, habits for themselves, the way they approach. They're simply not going to have people over their shoulder as much directing them. So you begin to work on your self-direction. You begin to work on your own um, habits of mind and habits of excellence. And I will just give this a piece of advice that I did not follow very well, but it was really sound advice. Try to schedule your classes, as much as this sounds like a drag. Try to schedule your classes largely between 8 and noon, if you can. That means getting there early, knowing a plan about that, and getting ahead of the curve of scheduling. Go have some lunch after your classes and use the afternoon from like 1, 2 o'clock to 5 to get all your work done. Use that time to go to the library, check out the stacks, put some things together, even take time to meet the professors to maybe get a better handle on what their expectations are. But get your business done before 5, then be done with it. Go out to eat, and then you have the rest of the evening to relax. The dude that gave me this information said I was pulling a 4.0, and yet I was at the bars and clubs with my friends all the time, and they're going, "How do you do this?" Because, as the old adage, I stored the hay first. The hay's been put away. It's stored. It is ready for those times when I need it. And that's in just terms of an organizational way to put it. Knowing this, if you are remotely social, you are going to have people of a variety of interests and commitment to their own education, and there is going to be temptation galore not to stay on track. Tons of it. Indulge in it once in a while, but don't get lost in it. And one of the reasons why I hear over and over and over again from students who were very bright in high school in terms of their grade point, and the reflection of that, and they're pretty good students who wash out their first year, wasn't because of their intellectual capacities. It was because they didn't know how to manage themselves on their own for their own success. They didn't know how to put that together. They didn't have some measures of coping skills when things were tempting them to get off track. And they found themselves almost in a constant need of somebody over their shoulder pushing them down corridor A instead of corridor B. That has nothing to do with the intellect. That has everything to do with kind of taking an ownership over your behaviors. That's not an easy transition. And so the quicker you can do that, the more effective you can do that, and the more consistent you can do that, I think you stand a far better shot at realizing your educational goals than if you don't.
Well, that was awesome advice. Thank
You
you.
bet. Thanks, Kim.